Welcome back to episode 9 of From the Couch Sports. I'm Connor, I'm your host, and if you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe. I got a lot I want to get into today. I know it's a couple days late, but I do want to recap some UFC from this past weekend, and we have a ton of NFL content to dive into. We've got the first 2 days of free agency pretty much done, at least the tampering period. Tomorrow is when things kind of officially begin. It's the new league year. And then we've got some more news going on as far as trades go, and then superstar QB on the move as well. So to kick things off, Deshaun Watson has been cleared of criminal charges. So basically what this means is Deshaun Watson, through the courts, they haven't deemed any of the allegations towards him to be things that he could be charged for on a criminal level. So most likely he's not going to do any kind of jail time. Actually, that's exactly what this means. He's not going to be doing any jail time for any of these actions. He does still have the civil lawsuit and everything. From my research, I don't believe the NFL has actually ever suspended a player for a civil suit. They've pretty much all been criminal charges. So in that aspect, I think Deshaun's pretty much cleared to go and play for a new football team. It's going to determine, what team that ends up being. And the rumor has it that pretty much every team is interested in Deshaun, regardless of any of these allegations. They don't really hold too much weight in it. Apparently, you would think 22 allegations is kind of a lot. 22 women to say something negative about a certain person. I think that's still a lot of people. But nonetheless, the NFL teams don't seem to care too much about it. They're even willing to package, crazy amount of picks. The rumor is at least 3 first-round picks, most likely 3 seconds, and then maybe even some additional player capital. And most teams, it seems like, are still willing to give this package up to get Deshaun. Which, if you talk about Deshaun Watson, the football player, when he's on the field, yeah, this could be the biggest quarterback that's ever been traded. It's a guy, I think he's 26, 27, entering the prime of his career as an athlete, and he is, in reality, he's a top 5 to 7 QB in the league when he's playing, which it's something, I know like a whole year went by and it seems like a lot of people forgot about Deshaun, but like when he was playing, like he's carrying this, Houston Texans team that's a poorly ran organization, and like his final year, I believe he led the league in yards passing, so this is clearly a dude who's very talented. It's just, putting things together as far as a trade package of who wants to trade for him. I'm going to list off a list of teams that are potentially in the running. So basically, Deshaun has a no trade clause. So he basically gets to pick who he wants to go to. The team still has to accept the trade. We're not going to accept, this trade if it's not what we want. But anything that's reasonable, anything that would be acceptable for Houston, if Deshaun signs off on it, then he's good to go. And the way things are sitting now, Deshaun's actually meeting with these teams to determine whether or not he's willing to, sign the no trade clause. But some of these teams that I think I'll name the teams that I think could be in the market for him. And then obviously we'll name the teams that are apparently already have trades approved and they're just waiting for him to meet with them. But you've got the Steelers. I know the Steelers just signed Mitch Trubisky. But if you get a chance to get Deshaun, it's not like they gave Mitch Trubisky a whole lot of money or anything, so they could very well still do that. The Saints are a very strong contender for this. You have the Panthers, another team that they say is all in on this trade. The Vikings could be. I know they just re-signed Kirk Cousins, so I think they're probably not a good chance that happens. They're probably going to keep rolling with Kirk. The Giants have 2 top 10 picks. So the Giants very well, if they want to get their name in, they could be involved in this. They got the new head coach, Brian DeBole. The Eagles, they have 3 first-round picks this year. So maybe Philadelphia could be a landing spot. The Seahawks rumored to be getting involved because they just let go of Russ. Then you have Tampa. Tampa. I need to delete Tampa. No way Tampa's happening now that Tom Brady's coming back. Um, yeah, another crazy thing happening in sports. Tom Brady retires for a month and a half, and he's ready to go back, playing his 23rd season, I believe. The Colts were interested. Apparently, they got kind of turned down. Texans are not trading in the division. Of course not. Makes no sense for them to. The Browns are also a dark horse in this trade. It seems like Cleveland is kind of putting all their chips into the table to trade for Deshaun. It's funny because they could have drafted him when he was available. And then you got the Dolphins. I don't think the Dolphins are. I think they've kind of pulled out of it. But you never know what happens last minute. A team could get really desperate and they could change their mind overnight. And then another couple teams that I don't think are going to trade for him, but there's been some kind of rumors out there. Cardinals potentially swapping Kyler for Deshaun. I mean, it makes sense kind of on both, if you look at both teams, because Deshaun has already been, he's already been paid, so his extension is good to go. Now, Kyler wants a bunch of money, so if you're looking at Houston, we trade this guy, we can pay him right away. He's also a young guy who could be a superstar. If you're looking at Arizona's perspective, you trade for Deshaun, you get a guy who might be an upgrade over Kyler. He certainly has shown more in those crucial moments than Kyler has. So maybe you see Deshaun as an upgrade. You repair Deshaun with DeAndre Hopkins. But, like I said, I don't think that's very likely. The three teams that are really likely from all the reports that are coming out, apparently Houston has agreed to trade packages. They're just waiting for Deshaun to meet with these teams to determine whether or not they will, allow the trade to go through. So you have the Saints, the Panthers, and the Browns. And, just looking at this, it's like, why would you go to the Saints? Like, the Saints, I get the Saints have Kamara, and they've got Michael Thomas, who most people say Michael Thomas is done in New Orleans. But they've got a new coach, Dennis Allen. He's a defensive-minded guy. And then outside of that, like, they're in horrible cap space, so they're probably going to have to get rid of a ton of players. So they just, it doesn't seem like the ideal landing spot that's going to help you win a Super Bowl. They very well could get Deshaun and then be in that kind of Drew Brees mold for a few years where you're pushing, you're in the wild card, you're making the playoffs, but you're not ever like pushing beyond that. And then maybe they think that they can build that team back up around Deshaun, which is a valid point. I mean, you're getting the guy who's still got plenty of time left in his career, so that could make sense. The Panthers, I think, are like one of the better, teams that are set up for this. They might have to get up some pieces, McCaffrey, DJ Moore, but they do have some nice pieces on offense, and then they have a really young, solid defense as well. So if you're Deshaun, the Panthers might be a good look for you to go to. And then, of course, the Browns. The Browns are the best team that's like involved in this. Like, the Browns have one of the best duo of running backs in football. They've got a great O-line. They just got Amari Cooper. They let go Jarvis Landry, but they've got some other good receivers, Peoples-Jones and whatnot. And then their defense, they've got one of the best pass rushers in football in Myles Garrett. And then you got a solid secondary and, just a pretty good defense overall. So if you're Cleveland, like, Deshaun is that Cleveland. It's funny to say this because the Browns are the Browns. They've been the Browns for years, and it seems like they're always just not good enough. But if you trade for a top 5-10 player at QB, then like maybe you can make that next step. But I do, it kind of brings me to my next point. If I'm Deshaun, like, whoever you go to, they're going to have to mortgage their entire future for you to play for them. So you're going to want to be on the team that's the best prepared to win right now. And, that might be the Browns. Looking at the other teams, like the Eagles have a decent roster. Outside of the Browns, like, most of these teams are going to be in like complete rebuild states. Like if the Panthers trade for Deshaun, Christian McCaffrey can't stay on the field healthy. They're probably going to have to give up like a Brian Burns or a big piece from their defense to get Deshaun. So that's like, that's tough. And then the Saints, I think the Saints is like probably the best organization if you're looking at the whole picture of things, with the way they ran with Sean Payton and everything. And he could start over there thinking, this is a team that they've shown they can build a team around a QB. So maybe he sees that as a good opportunity. But specifically, let's dive into the Browns. Baker Mayfield also posted a statement today, basically saying, I'm happy to say that I've committed everything of me. I've been my absolute best to Cleveland. Cleveland has made a lot of great memories in me and my wife's life. And whatever happens next, I want to thank Cleveland for the opportunity. It makes me think though, like Baker Mayfield is getting screwed over if this happens. Like people do not understand. Baker Mayfield is the greatest thing that happened to the Cleveland Browns for like over 20 years. Like, do you guys remember the meme, the old jersey, where the guy basically he had like I want to say a Tim Couch jersey or someone along those lines, and instead of getting a new jersey every year, they would just slap on a piece of tape with the name of the new QB they have. And this team went through like 15 different QBs in around the same amount of years. And so like this is a team that was constantly, they were searching for decades to get back to the playoffs, to land a QB that can help them win. And then you get Baker Mayfield, number 1 overall. He comes to a team that I don't think won a game the year before. That also drafted number 1 overall the year prior. And he comes to a team with Hugh Jackson, coach that gets fired mid-season. Then he has to deal with Freddie Kitchens, a coach that probably should not have been given the head coach position. And then in his 3rd year, he gets Stefanski, and he goes to the playoffs and wins a playoff game. And now people are just like, oh, Baker Mayfield, let's move on. Let's put our hands on the table for Deshaun. What if Kirk Cousins is available? This and that. And it's like, you guys don't understand how good you have it. Like, I'm a Jets fan, and we haven't had any QB even make the playoffs since Mark Sanchez. So for me to think like we could draft a QB and in year 3 he could go to make the playoffs. Like, let's say Zach Wilson does this. If Zach Wilson goes to the playoffs and beats a division rival in his 3rd season, I'm going to be super excited. And I'm going to want that guy to be the QB for the rest of his career. Like, this is a dude who's like helping turn around your organization, and you're just ready to cut ties with him because he played the entire season injured. Like, Baker Mayfield literally played all of 2021 injured, and he had a shoulder injury, and I think he had some other injuries as well. And like you could tell watching the game that he was clearly injured, but he's also clearly your best option despite being injured. And when he wasn't injured the year before, he took you guys into the playoffs, and you look like a team that could go deep and could potentially like compete for a Super Bowl. And Baker Mayfield has shown to be that dude at multiple points in his career. And like, let's not forget, Baker Mayfield is a guy who walked on, I think twice in college. He was a walk-on to become a Heisman quarterback, the best player in college essentially. And like, this is a guy who's had a chip on his shoulder his entire career. If you let Baker Mayfield walk, he might not be the most talented athlete. He might not have the most best arm in football, but Baker Mayfield is a guy who's going to dedicate everything, and he's going to lay it all on the line. And whatever team gets him next, if he doesn't stay in Cleveland, he's going to go out and he's going to prove them wrong. Like, he has constantly proved people wrong over and over throughout his career. And there's for sure media that doesn't like him, which I think is ridiculous. This is a guy who he's the best thing Cleveland has had at QB. And to think let's just toss him because he got hurt and played through an injury all year, it makes no sense. Like, this guy, they should have committed to him last year and given him an extension. He should be the Browns QB for the next 10 years. But he might not be. And I can also understand the argument, if you get an opportunity to take Deshaun Watson, a guy who you think might be a top 5 QB, might be top 10, and you see Baker Mayfield is more of like a top 15 guy. So you think making that difference, improving, is gonna be the difference between like where Baker Mayfield can take your team and winning a Super Bowl? Then I understand that argument. It's just, to me, I feel like Baker Mayfield's kind of getting screwed over. And like, let's just compare him to the rest of his rookie class, for example. So Baker Mayfield has a 14,000 yards passing, 92 touchdowns, and 56 interceptions. So not exactly a 2-to-1 ratio for touchdowns to picks, but still a pretty good ratio. And then, so the rest of the class, you got Sam Darnold, 10,000 yards. So basically, Baker Mayfield threw an entire season more of yards than Sam. 54 touchdowns, 52 picks. So Darnold is 4 interceptions away from Baker, but he's also close to 40 touchdowns off. That's crazy. Josh Rosen, another guy that was drafted top in this class, 2,800 yards, 12 touchdowns, 21 picks. Not even, I mean, he's bouncing between teams every year now. And then you got Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. These are the two top guys in this class. Josh Allen, 14,000 yards, right around the same as Baker, 103 touchdowns, 46 interceptions. So, like, a little bit less picks, a little bit more touchdowns. But, like, he's not, like, way, way, way better. Like, he for sure is probably a better QB. But, like, the gap, like, Baker Mayfield statistically isn't that far off. And then Lamar, 9,900 yards passing, 84 touchdowns, 31 picks. So he even has less picks than both. And then obviously he's doing crazy things on the ground as well. So like, the point of the argument isn't to say, Baker is better than Lamar or Baker is better than Josh Allen. The point is he's not that far off of them. And Cleveland finally has a reliable QB that can win them games and take them to the playoffs. And it's like, you don't understand how nice that is to have. Like, how do you guys quickly forget that you guys were one of the worst teams in all of sports for multiple decades? Like, you're just going to forget, like, how long it took you to get to this point just because you think the grass is greener, you think you can get someone a little bit better than Baker. Like, Baker's going to prove you guys wrong. And unless you do trade for Deshaun and he wins you a Super Bowl, then, like, what was it worth it? It probably isn't worth it. If you trade for Deshaun and you don't win a Super Bowl, that trade was completely worthless. Especially if, like, those picks that you give up end up becoming good players that you could have built around Baker. Like, would having Deshaun Watson with not a lot of weapons on offense be as good as having Baker with a ton of weapons? I don't know. But I think that I don't think the difference is as big as people want to make it out to be. I do think Baker is a lot better than people are saying, and he just had a down year because he was hurt most of the year. And I think things could turn around if he does stay in Cleveland. But kind of staying on the Browns, this is another head scratcher that some other teams didn't get involved in this. Amari Cooper went to the Browns for a 5th-round pick and a 6th-round pick swap. And then also Cleveland's going to take on his contract. But like that happening, Amari Cooper is better than a 5th-round pick typically. So that's pretty crazy to see some superstar player go for such a small amount of trade package just because of his contract. And even at that, like, Dallas was apparently going to cut him prior to this. But then part of this, Cleveland also basically loses Jarvis Landry, although he did want to kind of go to a different team. So we'll see where he winds up. But that's as far as I'm going to go with Cleveland. Like the Baker Mayfield thing, it's frustrating, especially as a Jets fan, because I'm like, if Zach Wilson goes and wins us a playoff game within his first 3 years, and then he gets hurt in year 4, but still plays and doesn't put up the same numbers, I'm gonna still rock with him. Like, you gotta a guy that takes you to the playoffs and wins you a playoff game, you gotta keep him for at least a few years, unless he like completely falls off and like is just the worst QB in football, which Baker wasn't. He was just hurt. But also, so this happened like right before free agency, the night before. Tom Brady decides to come back. It's crazy. This happened on the same day that his final touchdown pass was sold. The touchdown ball. I want to say it was sold for like $500,000, and then Tom Brady comes back the same day. Like that's got to be horrible if you were one of those people that, if you were the person that bought that ball. But with Brady coming back, this also kind of initiated a lot of other moves to be made for the Bucks. Ryan Jensen, the center, he returns, so it's good to have him back. Russell Gage, the wide receiver from Atlanta, he's coming over to Tampa. Carlton Davis re-signs, and then the Bucks just traded a fifth-round pick for Shaq Mason, the guard from the Patriots. And he's like a legit, really good guard, like and also a guard that like played with Brady for years. So that's a super big move, and like immediately the Bucks are like right back into the swing of things. Like they might be one of the favorites to go to the Super Bowl, but especially coming off the year Brady just had, like they're right in the mix of things. So that's gonna be super interesting to see how all that goes. What other moves did the Bucks make to kind of solidify the team they already have? You got to assume like Gronk is coming back, and maybe they get some of the running backs back and whatnot. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes forward. And then moving on, we've got some crazy things happening in free agency. I'm going to talk about my Jets here in a minute. But first, I want to start by like scratching my head about this Jaguars team. This Jaguars team last year, they allowed Urban Meyer to call all the shots. So Urban Meyer comes in, this is when he's not going home with his team, and he's hanging out at a bar that he owns in Ohio. Like, he brings in his entire staff. He brings in the GM, Trent Baalke, and people are literally wearing clown masks to Jags games because they want to fire the GM and the coach. And they fire the coach but decide to keep the GM that the coach brought, which makes absolutely zero sense. And this Jags team, so you let Urban Meyer be the coach. He has 2 first-round picks. Basically tells everybody with the second first-round pick he wanted to draft Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney's not on the board. So what do? You draft a running back and say that you're going to make him play the same position that Kadarius Toney plays. When like Elijah Moore was on the board, and like it makes zero sense. Like Travis Etienne is a great running back. Why would you draft him and expect him to play slot receiver? Like if you're gonna use him like in multiple ways, that's one thing. But like it seemed like he wanted him to fill the shoes that he wanted Kadarius Toney to be in, and so that was crazy. So he gets fired. Let the GM stay. And so this is what the GM has done thus far in this offseason. So one of the first deals they make, 4 years, $72 million to Christian Kirk. This Christian Kirk is like the 3rd or 4th best receiver on the Cardinals last year. And he's getting $18 million per year. I've seen other people report that he's getting up to $21 million per year. So basically this guy is going from not being the top 2 receivers on the Cardinals to being one of the highest paid receivers in all of football. That's crazy. And it's also like that kind of messes up the market for receiver. Like now if you're an Allen Robinson, it's like, dude, Christian Kirk made $18 million a year and you're trying to pay me $15? Get out of here. I'm better than him. So I mean, like I'm curious. I don't mean to knock, if someone offers you to pay you that much, you got to take it. But like if you're looking at it if you're a Jags fan, or if you're looking at it objectively, like you would think like if the Jags are going to go out and pay someone that much, you'd think that they'd be like the best guy on the market, which he wasn't, at least at this point. Maybe he's going to blossom into something that we didn't see in Arizona now that he's on the Jags, because he's going to have to. He's going to be like the main guy there. And then they also signed Zay Jones, the receiver, for 3 years, $24 million. They cut Miles Jack, who's like their star linebacker, also a head scratcher. If you're making all these moves, why don't you keep the guys that you already have? And then they bring in Evan Ingram, 1 year, $9 million deal. I mean, that's a high upside guy. Like you bring in a guy to the tight end room that could potentially do something. Like he seemed kind of underutilized on the Giants. And then another head scratcher, Brandon Scherf, 3 years, $50 million, just about 49.5. So you make a guard the highest paid guard in football, and this is a guy that hasn't been healthy at all, like in throughout most of his career. So like, do you expect him to come in and be healthy now? Time will tell, obviously, but we'll see. And then they picked up the Jets D tackle Foley Fatukasi, 3 year, $30 million deal. This is a 10 mil per year. I like Fatukasi. I liked him on the Jets. From what it looked like, it seemed like he's more of a nose tackle guy that didn't fit what the Jets are running. So I think that's why they didn't bring him back. But he's a good locker room guy and whatnot. And then the Jags also picked up Foye Olukun. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I might have totally butchered it, but 3 year, $45 million deal. He was the linebacker on the Falcons last year. So I mean, he's a good player, but like, to get him and then cut Miles Jack, it's just none of it makes sense to me. Like the amount of money that the Jags spent, you would think that they picked up some really big names, and that's not necessarily what they did. And then, get into my Jets. So my Jets, they brought back Tevin Coleman on a really small deal, a year. I think it's 1.5 million with potential to be a little more based on bonuses. They brought back Braxton Berrios, 2 year, $12 million deal with $7 million guaranteed. I think this is fair. He's one of the best kick returners in football, and he's a really good, reliable slot receiver. And then they also brought back LaMarcus Joyner. But then they get into the new moves, the free agency moves. CJ Uzomah from the Cincinnati Bengals, 3 year, $24 million deal. This is a guy who was super good on the Bengals last year. He was part of the reason that they went deep into the Super Bowl in the playoffs. And, I mean, he played the Super Bowl hurt and everything. Like, this is a totally guy that I want to bring into the Jets locker room. He fits in a hole that we need. We need a tight end. And adding him for the young QB, as we saw with Joe Burrow, great third down weapon. I think he's going to be awesome for the Jets. And then also on day one, we picked up Laken Tomlinson, the guard from the 49ers. So this is a guy who's been a Pro Bowl guard, 3 year, $40 million deal. So I think I want to say his contract comes to like 13.5 mil per season or somewhere in that range, because I think it's 41. But you get a really good guard that can start opposite of Elijah Vera Tucker. So now you got a legit O-line. Like, you might want to bring in some more pieces, but overall your O-line is a lot better. And this is exactly what you want to put around your second year QB now. And then on the defensive side, we picked up DJ Reed, the corner from Seattle, 3 year, $33 million deal. This is a guy who has experience with Robert Saleh. So I think he's going to be a great fit. We need more corners, so I really like this move. And then Jordan Whitehead, the safety from Tampa. This is another guy signing with the Jets, 2 year, $14.5 million. And I think this is a really good move for the Jets. We needed a safety, we needed a corner. We're able to go get both of them, so I like to see this. And then moving on to some of the other teams. The Chargers, they were able to get J.C. Jackson on a 5 year, $82.5 million deal. And then they also were able to shore up their D-line with Sebastian Joseph Day on a 3 year, $24 million deal. They ended up cutting Brian Bulaga. He only played one game last year, so I don't think they're going to necessarily feel a huge hole in for him for cutting him. But adding J.C. Jackson and Khalil Mack to a defense that was struggling last year, I mean, that's what you need if you want to make that next jump next year. They were already able to kind of retain their offensive weapons and everything. Herbert's just getting better. He's going to be into his third year. So I like the move so far for the Chargers. The Ravens made a big move getting Marcus Williams for 5 years, $70 million deal. he's awesome. He's one of the better safeties, one of the better players in this kind of free agency class at safety. So I think he'll be a big pickup for the Ravens, kind of filling the void that's been left since Earl Thomas. So that'll be cool. And then the Bills made a couple really good moves. Roger Saffold, the guard that was cut from Tennessee, but even before that, he was on the Rams. He's a solid guard, a good starter. And then they also picked up J.D. McKissick, who's like one of the best, receiving backs in football. So I think that's actually a really good move for Buffalo. They tend to not run the ball hardly at all. So you add J.D. McKissick, who's one of the best receiving threats out of the backfield. I think he's a good kind of fit for that offense. And obviously, they're not going to expect him to be an every down back. He's just going to come in and rotate. And then some of the other moves that were made, the Dolphins, they got Connor Williams, the guard, on a 2-year, $14 million deal. That fills a position of need for them. They picked up Cedric Wilson on a 3-year, $22.8 million deal. He was like he actually got a decent amount of playing time last year due to injuries and COVID and whatnot. But on the Cowboys, he was more like the number 4 guy. And then the Dolphins also got Chase Edmonds on a 2-year, $12.6 million deal. He's a good, versatile running back, which they definitely needed more help at running back. And then they brought Teddy Bridgewater in. And honestly, I think Teddy Bridgewater and Tua, I think they both fit really well. And, Teddy's a good veteran in the game, so I think that's a good fit. And then moving on, the Bengals made some good moves. They got Alex Kappa from the Bucks, 4-year, $40 million deal. And they also got the center from the Patriots, Ted Karras, on a 3-year, $18 million deal. So the Bengals definitely are investing in the O-line. They were able to bring a lot of the guys back that they had. They haven't done any huge splash moves yet, but we'll see. I think they probably are in the cards to do something like that. And then Denver added Randy Gregory on a 5-year, $70 million deal. This is funny because, apparently he was ready to re-sign with Dallas, and he was asking his agent some questions about offset language and some of the details of the contract. And there was some kind of hang-up. I don't know exactly what went down, but he ends up going to Denver on a similar contract. And then they also pick up DJ Jones on a 3-year, $30 million deal. He's a good D tackle as well. So Denver just getting better. They're really trying to push all their cards to the table and, go all in on a Super Bowl with Russ. And I like to see that. The Lions, they picked up DJ Chark for 1 year, $10 million. This is kind of what I'm curious about with the Christian Kirk thing. I think DJ Chark is a good young receiver, and is Christian Kirk worth that much more than DJ Chark is? I'm not sure, but I do like the pickup for the Lions. And then the Chiefs are letting the Honey Badger Tyrann Mathieu go, and they signed Justin Reed to a 3-year, $31.5 million deal. So they got a good replacement. But the rumor is they didn't even make an offer to keep him, which is crazy. The Honey Badger been one of the best safeties in football for years, and I still think he's going to be even these next couple years. But that covers pretty much everything I wanted to talk about for football. Obviously, maybe even when I'm making this video, there might have been another move happen. But lots of moves happen in the NFL, so we'll probably do another video in the next couple days, covering some more of those things. But to kind of switch topics, touch on some UFC. We had UFC Fight Night 60, or UFC Vegas 60. This last weekend. It kind of had a lackluster main event. This was Thiago Santos versus Magomed Ankalaev. And this was just a back and forth, two guys that are really big that can tell, hey, if I land big on you, you're going to get knocked out most likely. And you could tell that that's kind of how they were fighting. It's kind of how a lot of Santos's fights have been since getting injured. He's been a lot more kind of hesitant. And I don't know how much of that is the injury, or he also has just been facing the toughest competition that he could face, so it could be partially due to that. There was a time, I think it was the second or the third round, where Santos clipped Ankalaev, and it was towards the end of the round, and it looked like he was going to finish him, but then the round was over, and then Ankalaev was able to win pretty much every other part of the fight. And it's funny, like I understand if you're looking at it from a fighter's perspective, and like you can use the same kind of argument for people that don't like to see wrestling or any kind of grappling in MMA. It's like if you go into a fight with someone that has the ability to knock you out with one punch, how are you going to fight them? Are you going to fight them to their strengths, or are you going to fight them to your strengths? And I think a lot of times, like, people get on this, oh, he's nut hugging, and I don't want to see a lay and pray type grappler. And it's like, dude, put yourself in their shoes, and like, this is a mixed martial arts, so it's multiple forms of fighting. Like, you're gonna fight and win the way that you can. You do what it takes to get the win. At the end of the day, 10 years from now, people aren't going to remember that this was a lackluster main event. They're going to see the record, and they're going to see who won. And so, like, and I also, like, I understand these big dudes, sometimes they're hesitant to throw, and I get that. Like, if you're facing a dude that any punch that he lands can knock you out, you got to kind of be careful. Obviously, like, as fans, we want people to throw caution to the wind and just let's throw bombs at each other, and hopefully someone gets a knockout. And, like, as a fan, like, that's tons of fun to watch. But if you look at it from a fighter perspective, it's like that's probably not the smartest way to watch, or not the smartest way to fight. Like, the best way to fight is the way that you feel confident that you can win. So in my opinion, it was just kind of the main event didn't perform as much as I wanted it to. It's funny because, like, some of these events that end up being lackluster, they get talked about as like, oh, it was just a high stakes chess match. Like, first of all, this is fighting. It's a funny analogy. Like, it's a high stakes chess match. Like, they're being really technical, and like, it's like, dude, there I could understand there are certain fights where you could say that, like, two really high level strikers that don't really kind of get things going right away. Like trying to think, like, the Rory McDonald Robbie Lawler fight, for example. That fight tended to be like slow in the first couple rounds, and then it turns out to be like one of the best UFC fights ever. And so, like, a fight like that, maybe you could say those couple rounds were more of a chess match. But, like, just to say, like, oh, it was a chess match, technical, high stakes chess match, just because they're fighting and because it's a boring fight, I think that's a boring excuse. Like, I'm not here to put blame on any fighters. Obviously, I'm not the one getting in the octagon, so I'm not here to judge you on how you fight. I'm just, saying this from a fan perspective. Like, the fight was lackluster, but I also, like I said, I understand why it was lackluster, and I'm not here to put blame and say, oh, Santos should have gone out there and started throwing more shots and maybe got encountered and got knocked out, and same thing for Ankalaev. So that's just kind of my take on it. But outside of that, like, this was a super fun card. You had Song Yadong. He also fought Marlon Moraes. He got a TKO in I think it was the first round. I know it's been a couple days since the fight, but to me, this is the saddest part of MMA. And really any sport that you watch, your favorite athletes, they go through their prime of their career, and then usually you see a drop off. So, like, I'm gonna use a basketball analogy, or we could even talk football. But, like, for example, Dwayne Wade, my favorite basketball player growing up, this is a guy who was, like, one of the best players in basketball, like top 5 guy, MVP candidate. He wins a few rings with LeBron, and then he just kind of takes a huge step off. Like, you could tell that it's something that, like, he lost something athletically. And sometimes you still get a performance like where he drops 25 or 30 or something, but it's clear. It's like, this is not the same guy who was a top 5 guy in the NBA. He's not that good anymore. It's just an age thing. And with MMA, it's the only time where we see a professional athlete go from, that peak that we remember. Like, and the thing too in MMA is the peak is so much higher, because like in other sports, it's like you win a Super Bowl or you win a championship in basketball. Like, those are really good accolades, but they're not the same as being in an octagon with another human and knocking them out cold and winning a championship belt. And like, so I think that's what changes in MMA is then we see like these guys that come in and, they're really fun to watch. Marlon Moraes is one of them. Incredible striker and always fun to watch. And then, they go on a string of losses. This guy, he lost to Marab, Rob Font, Corey Sandhagen, and now Song Yadong. And he's losing to like really good competition. I think he lost to Cejudo as well. But he's losing to like the top of the division. But it's also like, it's sad to see like these guys that are guys that you watched for years, that you're a big fan of, and then, instead of other sports where you see them kind of like take a step back and they're not that same level of athlete anymore on the field, and it's not like that sad. It's like in this case, instead of just, them not performing as well as they used to, they're getting knocked out and they're getting brain damage. And like, this is, I don't want to see Moraes continue to get knocked out in other fights. Like, I wanted to see him kind of get back and get a win. And it's sad seeing this happen to MMA fighters, but it also happens to boxers if they fight long enough. And it's part of the sport, so I understand that as well. But it also looks like at the end of the fight, Marlon Moraes took his gloves off in the octagon. I don't know if that necessarily means that he is retired. I would say there's a good chance that he is. I definitely don't want to see like, one of these other. I feel like a lot of times these other organizations will pick him up, and then, what happens with a UFC fighter when they're old is people want to see them thrown against the young guys and added to their highlight reel. Like, Song Yadong is 24 years old, and the UFC is going to probably be using this clip of him getting this knockout for the next 5 years at least. So it's like, I get it. Like, if you're the UFC, like, he got a big win over a really good decorated guy, but it's also like, don't continue to fight when that's what's gonna happen. Like, you're being thrown to the wolves. Like, I'd rather see these guys, like, especially if they're not like competing for a belt anymore. Like, if you're in a Derek Brunson position like before his last fight, and you're like on your path to fighting for the belt, then that's one thing. But if you've dropped a bunch of fights, like Cowboy, for example, and like you're continuing to fight these young up and coming guys that are hungry to get these wins, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, I'd rather see you matched up against another guy who's in the same boat as you, and then maybe you guys can both finish your careers on a better note, or maybe you get the win and then he fights another time and tries to get another win. Like, I think that's a lot better than seeing your favorite guys getting knocked out. But that's just my take on it. I know Moraes, since he lost, he didn't really get much attention for taking his gloves off in the octagon. And also, like, he wasn't the main event either, so they don't always let these people get enough, like, time because they're trying to move things along and whatnot. But besides this, Sodiq Yusuff and Alex Caceres, this was a fun fight too. It was interesting. Like, there's not a lot of fights where the majority of the fight is won by leg kicks. And Sodiq Yusuff, he landed over 50% of his strikes to the legs. So 34 leg kicks out of 64 total landed strikes. And basically what this did is just completely battered Alex's leg. Alex wasn't able to kind of initiate any grappling because of this. He was just working off of one leg. So he wasn't able to get the win, but it was a fun fight while it was going on. And then the fight before that, Khalil Roundtree had a brutal finish on Carl Roberson. He goes out in the second round, and like, it's just something switched. Like, he goes out and he's trying to kill. Immediately throwing bombs, he drops Roberson, and then he has like one of those crazy soccer kicks to the body. It's something we don't see a lot in MMA. Because usually, like, you don't kick or knee your downed opponent But to the body, it's different. Like he couldn't have done that kick to the face, but he landed it to the body, and he got just a crazy finish. He is a ton of fun to watch. He's going in these fights and just, he's hurting people. Like he's one of the scariest dudes in MMA, in my opinion. Like his last two finishes, one of them, he stomps this dude's knee out, and then this last fight, he just gets this crazy kick to the body, win, and like he's putting people out. He's super dangerous to watch, and it's definitely fun. I'm curious to see kind of where he goes next. And then before this, so a couple other super fun fights in this card. Drew Dober and Terrence McKinney. That was like the round of the year thus far. This fight starts off. Terrence McKinney goes in there and looks like he's just gonna put Dober out immediately. He drops him in the first 5 seconds, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is Terrence McKinney gonna get another 7-second knockout or like even close to that? And it looks like he is. Like there's multiple times he lands a bunch of big knees, good strikes with the hands. He landed a head kick even when Dober was getting up. And Drew Dober just keeps going through it. He doesn't get put out. There was a couple times where it looked like maybe the ref could stop it, but Dober hangs in there. And then towards the back part of the first round, he lands a big knee on Terrence's chin and then drops him and finishes him on the ground. And so, like, that's a huge win for Drew Dober. That was an incredible fight. You got to give props to Terrence for stepping in on such short notice. He took this fight, I think, on 2 weeks' notice, and he just fought last month. So, he's still a guy I think is going to be super dangerous. Obviously, like he cut weight twice in a relatively short period of time. But he looks to be like a really dangerous contender, especially if he can kind of get beyond the first round, if he can settle in the fights and not like try to rush everything. And it seemed like he might have got a little tired, rightfully so. Like it looked like Dober was about to be put out, and Terrence was throwing everything at him, and somehow he wasn't able to put him out. Like I think that would happen to most people in that situation. But another thing that was fun about this is Drew Dober called out Bobby Green, which I think would be a ton of fun to watch. I think that could be like maybe even like a main event of a ESPN card. Otherwise, it's a really fun fight you could add to a pay-per-view even. And then the fight before this, Alex Pereira versus Bruno Silva. This fight was a war. And I'm curious because I hear a lot of different things online. Like people look at this fight and they're like, Pereira couldn't hang on with Izzy at all. Like he doesn't even belong talking about fighting Izzy. What is going on? Like people are like discrediting the fact that Bruno Silva is a legit fighter. Like I think he was on a 5 to 7 fight win streak where all of the fights were finishes. And like this fight was crazy. Like they were both throwing bombs at each other. Pereira he definitely has a really fun style to watch. He throws a lot of kicks and he's got some crazy power in his hands. And he got the win. But like, I'll be the first to say like what's happened since he beat Izzy in a fight that like Izzy probably was like ahead on before getting knocked out. Like Izzy has done way more in MMA. Izzy is the champion and he's lapped the division. So to act like this guy's gonna come in and smoke Izzy is crazy, especially when he hasn't fought a ranked contender or a ranked opponent. But also on the same token, like to say that this fight is proof that he can't fight Izzy, I also disagree with. I think there's a middle line where I want to see Pereira fight someone in the top 15 and then, move up the ranks. And if he moves up the ranks and he beats these guys, like he'll have a track record that will be much more deserving to fight Izzy. And also, like, I want to see him against a guy that's going to grapple much more. I know they said that Bruno Silva's a black belt, but I don't think he's ever actually got a finish in a fight by submission. They've pretty much all been knockouts, which is still super impressive. So, I think this fight kind of raised both of the guys' stocks. Alex Pereira called out Jared Cannonier after the fight. That fight makes no sense. He's saying he thinks that it's okay for him to call him out. Like, if he were to have had like some kind of spectacular KO and then he wants to call out a top ranked guy, like cool. But Jared Cannonier is going to fight Izzy for the belt most likely this summer. So, like, that fight makes zero sense. And the only reason Alex Pereira wants that fight is because if he were to beat Cannonier, then he's in the title, like, immediately. But in reality, like, he should move up the ranks. He should fight a guy from 10 to 15. If he wins that fight, fight another guy. Like, depending on how spectacularly you win these fights, you can move up the ranks. But that's just how I see it. There was actually a couple good fun fights on the prelims as well. The Matthew Semmelsberger fight versus AJ Fletcher. This was AJ Fletcher's UFC debut. It's a guy who was undefeated. And this was a really fun fight. You could tell Semmelsberger is the veteran of the game. Fletcher, the pace of this fight was crazy. They were both high-paced grappling, throwing a bunch of bombs. It looks like Semmelsberger had a little bit more power in there. But Fletcher looked good. He looked really good in the first round, and then the second round he kind of got flipped on the ground. He wasn't able to take him down consistently like he had hoped. So that kind of changed the fight, but that was a really fun fight in the prelims. And then the Javid Basharat versus Trevin Jones, super fun too. Basharat stood standing most of this fight. And he was just picking Jones apart, just so fluid with his strikes. And then Jones also showed that he's got pretty good power too, so he was trying to, fight back, and it was a really fun fight to watch. And then, I want to wrap things up talking one other MMA event. This is non-UFC. This was the Eagle FC card. This was Kevin Lee versus Diego Sanchez. And, going into this fight, like, I'm a big Diego Sanchez guy. Big Diego Sanchez fan. I'm from New Mexico. I've watched Diego for years, and like these last couple of years, it's been sad seeing what's happened to Diego's career with Fabia and whatnot. And you go into this fight. I think Kevin Lee was a minus 1,000 favorite. So like going into this fight, it's like I really don't want to see Diego Sanchez get knocked out. We saw Kevin Lee The knockout he had on Gregor Gillespie was just insane. And I was going into this please don't let this happen to Diego Sanchez. I want Diego to compete in this fight and have a good fight. And not only did he do that, he exceeded all of my expectations. He looked really good. And Kevin Lee, you could tell is the younger, more athletic guy. And Kevin Lee, so the fight starts, Diego Sanchez kicks Kevin Lee's knee, blows out he thinks it was his ACL, blows out his knee on the first 10 seconds of the fight. So Lee was basically fighting on one leg. So a lot of people kind of crapping on him. He called for the 165-pound division, and then in his first fight, he butchers his leg, and it's like he doesn't get a finish or anything. But it's like, dude, he's on one leg. He might have looked way better if he was on both legs the whole fight. Who knows? But I don't want to bash on Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee still looked good. But Diego Sanchez, he looks like he could still be in there. He looked really good. And maybe these last couple years and him kind of falling off, was because of Josh Fabia. And because Diego looked really good multiple times in this fight. Obviously, he didn't get the result that he wanted with the win. But getting, being in there with a guy like Kevin Lee after everything that Diego's been through, off of getting COVID and being hospitalized a few months back, that's a feel-good story. I think Diego's going to fight a few more times, but, that's fun to see as a fan. And then, going forward with Diego Sanchez's career, I want to see him fight some more veterans. If the Eagle FC could bring in some other guys, around Diego's age, maybe some matchups that we never saw with Diego in his prime, I think that would be ideal. I don't want to see him fight, whoever Khabib thinks is his young, his up-and-coming guys, because, that brings back to the argument we were talking about earlier, is, you're trying to put Diego on these guys' highlight reels. I want Diego to add more highlights to his highlight reel so he can finish his career on a good note. And at the very least, if he's not able to do that, I want to see more fights like this one with Kevin Lee, because Diego Sanchez held his own and he looked really good in there. But that's just my take on everything from this last couple days. My take on the NFL, the free agency period starting. Let me know your thoughts on everything. What did you think about this UFC card recently? What do you think about the moves your favorite NFL teams making? Let me know. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for tuning in.